Hello, my name is Mysterygirl00 and in this video we will briefly review all the kings and queens of Great Britain, so relax and enjoy.
William, the Conqueror, 1066–1087, also known as William the Bastard, but not normally to his face. He was the illegitimate son of Robert the Devil, whom he succeeded as Duke of Normandy in 1035. William came to England from Normandy, claiming that his second cousin Edward the Confessor had promised him the throne, and defeated Harold II at the Battle of Hastings on 14 October 1066. In 1085 the Domesday Survey was begun and all of England was recorded, so William knew exactly what his new kingdom contained and how much tax he could raise in order to fund his armies. William died at Rouen after a fall from his horse whilst besieging the French city of Nantes. He is buried at the Abbey of St. Stephen in Caen, France. William II reigned 1087–1100. William was not a popular king, given to extravagance and cruelty. He never married and was killed in the New Forest by a stray arrow whilst out hunting, maybe accidentally, or possibly shot deliberately on the instructions of his younger brother Henry. Walter Tyrrell, one of the hunting party, was blamed for the deed. The Rufus Stone in the New Forest, Hampshire, marks the spot where he fell. William II is buried at Winchester Cathedral in the city of Winchester, Hampshire, England. King Henry I reigned from 1100 to 1135. Henry Beauclerk was the fourth and youngest son of William the Conqueror. Well educated, he founded a zoo at Woodstock in Oxfordshire to study animals. He was called the Lion of Justice as he gave England good laws, even if the punishments were ferocious. His two sons were drowned in the White Ship, so his daughter Matilda was made his successor. She was married to Geoffrey Plantagenet. When Henry died of food poisoning, the council considered a woman unfit to rule and so offered the throne to Stephen, a grandson of William the Conqueror. King Henry I is buried in an unknown location amongst the ruins at Reading Abbey in Berkshire, England. King Stephen reigned from 1135 to 1154. Stephen was a very weak king and the whole country was almost destroyed by the constant raids by the Scots and the Welsh. During Stephen's reign the Norman barons wielded great power, extorting money and looting town and country. A decade of civil war known as the Anarchy ensued when Matilda invaded from Anjou in 1139. A compromise was eventually decided. Under the terms of the Treaty of Westminster, Matilda's son Henry Plantagenet would succeed to the throne when Stephen died. Stephen was laid to rest in Faversham Abbey, which no longer is in existence. King Henry II reigned 1154 to 1189. Henry of Anjou was a strong king, a brilliant soldier. He extended his French lands until he ruled most of France. He laid the foundation of the English jury system and raised new taxes, scutage, from the landholders to pay for a militia force. Henry is mostly remembered for his quarrel with Thomas à Becket, and Becket's subsequent murder in Canterbury Cathedral on 29 December 1170. His sons turned against him, even his favourite John. He is buried at Fontevraud Abbey in Anjou, France. King Richard I, the Lionheart, reigned 1189 to 1199. Richard was the third son of Henry II. By the age of 16, he was leading his own army putting down rebellions in France. Although crowned King of England, Richard spent all but 6 months of his reign abroad, preferring to use the taxes from his kingdom to fund his various armies and military ventures. He was the leading Christian commander during the Third Crusade. On his way back from Palestine, Richard was captured and held for ransom. The amount paid for his safe return almost bankrupted the country. Richard died from a narrow wound, far from the kingdom that he so rarely visited. He had no children. He is buried at Fontevraud Abbey in Anjou, France. King John of Lackland reigned from 1199 to 1216. John Lackland was the fourth child of Henry II. Short and fat, he was jealous of his dashing brother Richard I, whom he succeeded. He was cruel, self-indulgent, selfish and avaricious, and the raising of punitive taxes united all the elements of society, clerical and lay, against him. The Pope excommunicated him. On the 15th of June in 1215 at Runnymede, the barons compelled John to sign the Magna Carta, the Great Charter, which reinstated the rights of all his subjects. John died, from overeating, a fugitive from all his enemies. He has been termed the worst English king. He is buried at Worcester Cathedral in Worcestershire, England. King Henry III reigned from 1216 to 1272. Henry was 9 years old when he became king. Brought up by priests, he became devoted to church, art and learning. He was a weak man, dominated by churchmen and easily influenced by his wife's French relations. In 1264 Henry was captured during the rebellion of barons led by Simon de Montfort and was forced to set up a parliament at Westminster. The start of the House of Commons. Henry was the greatest of all patrons of medieval architecture and ordered the rebuilding of Westminster Abbey in the Gothic style. He is buried at Westminster Abbey in London, England. King Edward I reigned from 1272 to 1307. Edward Longshanks was a statesman, lawyer and soldier. He formed the Model Parliament in 1295, bringing the knights, clergy and nobility, as well as the Lords and Commons together for the first time. Aiming at a united Britain, he defeated the Welsh chieftains and created his eldest son Prince of Wales. He was known as the Hammer of the Scots for his victories in Scotland and brought the famous coronation stone from Scone to Westminster. When his first wife Eleanor died, he escorted her body from Grantham in Lincolnshire to Westminster, setting up Eleanor crosses at every resting place. He died on the way to fight Robert Bruce. He is buried at Westminster Abbey in London, England. King Edward II reigned from 1307 to 1327. Edward was a weak and incompetent king. He had many favourites, Piers Gaveston being the most notorious. He was beaten by the Scots at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314. Edward was deposed and held captive in Berkeley Castle in Gloucestershire. His wife joined her lover Mortimer in deposing him. By their orders he was murdered in Berkeley Castle, as legend has it, by having a red-hot poker thrust up his anus. His burial tomb is in Gloucester Cathedral, Gloucestershire, England, which was erected by his son, King Edward III. King Edward III reigned from 1327 to 1377. Son of Edward II, he reigned for 50 years. His ambition to conquer Scotland and France plunged England into the 100 Years' War, beginning in 1338. The two great victories at Crécy and Poitiers made Edward and his son, the Black Prince, the most renowned warriors in Europe. However, the war was very expensive. The outbreak of bubonic plague, the Black Death in 1348 to 1350 killed half the population of England. Edward III is buried at Westminster Abbey in London, England. King Richard II reigned from 1377 to 1399. The son of the Black Prince, Richard was extravagant, unjust and faithless. In 1381 came the Peasants' Revolt, led by Wat Tyler. The rebellion was put down with great severity. The sudden death of his first wife Anne of Bohemia completely unbalanced Richard, and his extravagance, acts of revenge and tyranny turned his subjects against him. In 1399 Henry of Lancaster returned from exile and deposed Richard, becoming elected King Henry IV. Richard was murdered, probably by starvation, in Pontefract Castle in 1400. He is buried at Westminster Abbey in London, England. King Henry IV reigned from 1399 to 1413. The son of John of Gaunt, third son of Edward III, Henry returned from exile in France to reclaim his estates previously seized by Richard II. He was accepted as king by Parliament, Henry spent most of his 13-year reign defending himself against plots, rebellions and assassination attempts. In Wales, Owen Glendower declared himself Prince of Wales and led a national uprising against English rule. Back in England, Henry had great difficulty in maintaining the support of both the clergy and Parliament, and between 1403–8 the Percy family launched a series of rebellions against him. Henry, the first Lancastrian king, died exhausted, probably of leprosy, at the age of 45. He is buried at Canterbury Cathedral in the city of Canterbury in Kent, England. King Henry V reigned from 1413 to 1422. The son of Henry IV, he was a pious, stern and skillful soldier. Henry had honed his fine soldiering skills putting down the many rebellions launched against his father, and had been knighted when aged just 12. He pleased his nobles by renewing the war with France in 1415. In the face of tremendous odds he beat the French at the Battle of Agincourt, losing just 400 of his own soldiers with more than 6,000 Frenchmen killed. On a second expedition Henry captured Rouen, was recognized as the next king of France and married Catherine, the daughter of a lunatic French king. Henry died of dysentery whilst campaigning in France. And before he could succeed to the French throne, leaving his 10-month-old son as King of England and France. He is buried at Westminster Abbey in London, England. King Henry VI reigned from 1422 to 1461. Gentle and retiring, he came to the throne as a baby and inherited a losing war with France, the 100 Years' War finally ending in 1453 with the loss of all French lands except for Calais. The king had an attack of mental illness that was hereditary in his mum's family in 1454, and Richard, Duke of York, was made protector of the realm. The House of York challenged Henry VI's right to the throne and England was plunged into civil war. The Battle of St. Albans in 1455 was won by the Yorkists. Henry was restored to the throne briefly in 1470. Henry's son, Edward, Prince of Wales, was killed at the Battle of Tewkesbury one day before Henry was murdered in the Tower of London in 1471. Henry founded both Eton College and King's College, Cambridge, and every year the provosts of Eton and King's College lay roses and lilies on the altar which now stands where he died. He is buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England. King Edward IV reigned from 1461 to 1483. He was the son of Richard, Duke of York, and Cicely Neville, and not a popular king. His morals were poor. He had many mistresses and had at least one illegitimate son. And even his contemporaries disapproved of him. Edward had his rebellious brother George, Duke of Clarendon, murdered in 1478 on a charge of treason. During his reign the first printing press was established in Westminster by William Caxton. Edward died suddenly in 1483, leaving two sons aged 12 and 9, and 5 daughters. He is buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England. King Edward V reigned for only 2 months in 1483. The shortest-lived monarch in English history. His mother, Elizabeth Woodville, had sought sanctuary from Lancastrians during the Wars of the Roses. He was the eldest son of Edward IV. He succeeded to the throne at the tender age of 13. He and his brother Richard were murdered in the Tower of London, which would become to be known as the murder of the two princes. By whom? Well, that is the mystery. Some say their uncle, the soon-to-be King Richard III, our king who was discovered in the car park and recently buried. Others say perhaps the forerunner to Richard III, that being Henry Tudor. It truly is one of Britain's greatest unsolved mystery, and more than likely will remain at that. Edward's remains were discovered during repair work being done at the Tower of London in 1674. Along with his younger brother Prince Richard, though never proven to be validated, they were placed in a large urn and now rest in Westminster Abbey. King Richard III reigned from 1483 to 1485. Brother of Edward IV. The ruthless extinction of all those who opposed him and the alleged murders of his nephews made his rule very unpopular. In 1485 Henry Richmond, descendant of John of Gaunt, father of Henry IV, landed in West Wales, gathering forces as he marched into England. At the Battle of Bosworth Field in Leicestershire he defeated and killed Richard in what was to be the last important battle in the Wars of the Roses. Archaeological investigations at a car park in Leicester during 2012 revealed a skeleton which was thought to have been that of Richard III, and indeed it was proven true as DNA testing was done on a living descendant Michael Ibsen pictured. His body was reinterred at Leicester Cathedral this past March of 2015.
Just a little tidbit: King Richard III is my favorite among the royals, he had such a naughty reputation, haha.
King Henry VII reigned from 1485 to 1509. When Richard III fell at the Battle of Bosworth, his crown was picked up and placed on the head of Henry Tudor. He married Elizabeth of York and so united the two warring houses, York and Lancaster. The material wealth of the country increased greatly. During Henry's reign playing cards were invented and the portrait of his wife Elizabeth has appeared 8 times on every pack of cards for nearly 500 years. Henry died at Richmond at the age of 54, leaving a now rich and powerful England to his son, Henry VIII. Henry VII is buried at Westminster Abbey, London, England. King Henry VIII reigned from 1509 to 1547. The best-known fact about Henry VIII is that he had 6 wives. Most schoolchildren learn the following rhyme to help them remember the fate of each wife: divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. His first wife was Catherine of Aragon, his brother's widow, whom he later divorced to marry Anne Boleyn. This divorce caused the split from Rome and Henry declared himself the head of the Church of England. The dissolution of the monasteries began in 1536, and the money gained from this helped Henry to bring about an effective navy. In an effort to have a son, Henry married 4 further wives, but only one son was born, to Jane Seymour. Henry had 2 daughters, both to become rulers of England: Mary, daughter of Catherine of Aragon, and Elizabeth, daughter of Anne Boleyn. Henry died in 1547 and was laid to rest at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England.
King Henry VIII, to 6 wives he was wedded. 1 died, 1 survived, 2 divorced, 2 beheaded. I guess I can make a rap record of that, haha. One thing is certain, I make a poor comic.
King Edward VI reigned from 1547 to 1553. The son of Henry VIII and Jane Seymour, Edward was a sickly boy. It is thought he suffered from tuberculosis. Edward succeeded his father at the age of 9. Even though his reign was short, many men made their mark. Cranmer wrote the Book of Common Prayer, and the uniformity of worship helped turn England into a Protestant state. After Edward's death there was a dispute over the succession. Edward died in 1553 and was buried at Westminster Abbey in London. There was a dispute over the succession. As Mary was Catholic, Lady Jane Grey was named as the next in line to the throne. She was proclaimed queen, but Mary entered London with her supporters and Jane was taken to the Tower. She reigned for only 9 days. She was executed in 1554, aged 17. Queen Mary I, Bloody Mary, reigned from 1553 to 1558, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. A devout Catholic, she married Philip of Spain. Mary attempted to enforce the wholesale conversion of England to Catholicism. She carried this out with the utmost severity. The Protestant bishops, Latimer, Ridley and Archbishop Cranmer were among those burnt at the stake. The place, in Broad Street, Oxford, is marked by a bronze cross. The country was plunged into a bitter bloodbath, which is why she is remembered as Bloody Mary. She died in 1558 at Lambeth Palace in London and was buried at Westminster Abbey. Queen Elizabeth I reigned from 1558 to 1603. The daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth was a remarkable woman, noted for her learning and wisdom. From first to last she was popular with the people and had a genius for the selection of capable advisers. Drake, Raleigh, Hawkins, the Cecils, Essex and many more made England respected and feared. The Spanish Armada was decisively defeated in 1588 and Raleigh's first Virginian colony was founded. The execution of Mary Queen of Scots marred what was a glorious time in English history. Shakespeare was also at the height of his popularity. Elizabeth never married. She died in 1603 and was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey. King James I reigned from 1603 to 1625. James was the son of Mary Queen of Scots and Lord Darnley. He was the first king to rule over Scotland and England. James was more of a scholar than a man of action. In 1605 the Gunpowder Plot was hatched. Guy Fawkes and his Catholic friends tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament, but were captured before they could do so. James's reign saw the publication of the authorized version of the Bible, though this caused problems with the Puritans and their attitude towards the established church. In 1620 the Pilgrim Fathers sailed for America in their ship the Mayflower. King James I was laid to rest in Westminster Abbey, London, England, died in 1625. King Charles I reigned from 1625 to 1649. The son of James I and Anne of Denmark, Charles believed that he ruled by divine right. He encountered difficulties with Parliament from the beginning, and this led to the outbreak of the English Civil War in 1642. The war lasted 4 years and following the defeat of Charles's royalist forces by the New Model Army, led by Oliver Cromwell, Charles was captured and imprisoned. The House of Commons tried Charles for treason against England and when found guilty he was condemned to death. His death warrant states that he was beheaded on Tuesday the 30th of January 1649. Following this the British monarchy was abolished and a republic called the Commonwealth of England was declared. Charles was laid to rest in St. George's Chapel at Berkshire, England, alongside Henry VIII. Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell reigned from 1653 to 1658. Cromwell was born at Huntingdon, Cambridgeshire in 1599, the son of a small landowner. He entered Parliament in 1629 and became active in events leading to the Civil War. A leading Puritan figure, he raised cavalry forces and organized the New Model Army, which he led to victory over the Royalists at the Battle of Naseby in 1645, failing to gain agreement on constitutional change in government with Charles I. Cromwell was a member of a special commission that tried and condemned the king to death in 1649. Cromwell declared Britain a republic, the Commonwealth, and he went on to become its Lord Protector. He is buried at Westminster Abbey, London, England. Lord Protector Richard Cromwell reigned from 1658 to 1659. Richard was the third son of Oliver Cromwell. He was appointed the second ruling Lord Protector of England, Scotland, and Ireland, serving for just 9 months. Unlike his father, Richard lacked military experience and as such failed to gain respect or support from his new model army. Richard was eventually persuaded to resign from his position as Lord Protector and exiled himself to France until 1680, when he returned to England. He is buried at All Saints Churchyard, Hampshire, England. King Charles II reigned from 1660 to 1685. Son of Charles I, also known as the Merry Monarch. after the collapse of the Protectorate following the death of Oliver Cromwell and the flight of Richard Cromwell to France. The army and parliament asked Charles to take the throne. Although very popular, he was a weak king and his foreign policy was inept. He had 13 known mistresses, one of whom was Nell Gwyn. He fathered numerous illegitimate children but no heir to the throne. The Great Plague in 1665 and the Great Fire of London in 1666 took place during his reign. Many new buildings were built at this time. St. Paul's Cathedral was built by Sir Christopher Wren, and also many churches still to be seen today. Charles II was buried at Westminster Abbey in 1685. King James II reigned from 1685 to 1688. He was the second surviving son of Charles I and younger brother of Charles II. James had been exiled following the Civil War and served in both the French and Spanish army. Although James converted to Catholicism in 1670, his 2 daughters were raised as Protestants. James became very unpopular because of his persecution of the Protestant clergy and was generally hated by the people. Following the Monmouth uprising, Monmouth was an illegitimate son of Charles II and a Protestant, and the bloody assizes of Judge Jeffreys, Parliament tasked the Dutch prince, William of Orange, to take the throne. He was buried in 1701 at Église-Paroissiale, France. King William III reigned from 1689 to 1702 and Queen Mary II reigned from 1689 to 1694. William and Mary were to reign jointly, and William was to have the crown for life after Mary died. On the 5th of November 1688, William of Orange sailed his fleet of over 450 ships, unopposed by the Royal Navy, into Torbay Harbour and landed his troops in Devon, gathering local support. He marched his army, now 20,000 strong, on to London in the Glorious Revolution. Many of James II's army had defected to support William, as well as James's other daughter Anne. James plotted to regain the throne and in 1689 landed in Ireland. William defeated James at the Battle of the Boyne and James fled again to France, as guest of Louis XIV. Both William and Mary are buried at Westminster Abbey. Queen Anne reigned from 1702 to 1714. Anne was the second daughter of James II. She had 17 pregnancies but only one child survived, William, who died of smallpox aged just 11. A staunch, High Church Protestant. Anne was 37 years old when she succeeded to the throne. Anne was a close friend of Sarah Churchill, the Duchess of Marlborough. Sarah's husband, the Duke of Marlborough, commanded the English army in the War of Spanish Succession, winning a series of major battles with the French and gaining the country an influence never before attained in Europe. It was during Anne's reign that the United Kingdom of Great Britain was created by the Union of England and Scotland. Anne was buried at Westminster Abbey in 1714. King George I reigned from 1714 to 1727. Son of Sophia and the Elector of Hanover, great-grandson of James I. The 54-year-old George arrived in England able to speak only a few words of English with his 18 cooks and 2 mistresses in tow. George never learned English, so the conduct of national policy was left to the government of the time, with Sir Robert Walpole becoming Britain's first Prime Minister. In 1715 the Jacobites, followers of James Stuart, son of James II, attempted to supplant George, but the attempt failed. George spent little time in England, he preferred his beloved Hanover. Although he was implicated in the South Sea Bubble financial scandal of 1720, George died in 1727 and was buried at Bergarten Mausoleum in Lower Saxony, Niedersachsen, Germany. King George II reigned from 1727 to 1760, only son of George I. He was more English than his father, but still relied on Sir Robert Walpole to run the country. George was the last English king to lead his army into battle at Dettingen in 1743. In 1745 the Jacobites tried once again to restore a Stuart to the throne. Prince Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, landed in Scotland. He was routed at Culloden Moor by the army under the Duke of Cumberland, known as Butcher Cumberland. Bonnie Prince Charlie escaped to France with the help of Flora MacDonald, and finally died a drunkard's death in Rome. George died in 1760 and was laid to rest at Westminster Abbey. King George III reigned from 1760 to 1820. He was a grandson of George II and the first English-born and English-speaking monarch since Queen Anne. His reign was one of elegance and the age of some of the greatest names in English literature: Jane Austen, Byron, Shelley, Keats, and Wordsworth. It was also the time of great statesmen like Pitt and Fox and great captains like Wellington and Nelson. In 1773 the Boston Tea Party was the first sign of the troubles that were to come in America. The American colonies proclaimed their independence on July 4, 1776. George was well-meaning but suffered from a mental illness due to intermittent porphyria and eventually became blind and insane. His son ruled as Prince Regent after 1811 until George's death in 1820. He is buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England. King George IV reigned from 1820 to 1830. Known as the first gentleman of Europe. He had a love of art and architecture, but his private life was a mess, to put it mildly. He married twice, once in 1785 to Mrs. Fitzherbert, secretly as she was a Catholic, and then in 1795 to Caroline of Brunswick. Mrs. Fitzherbert remained the love of his life. Caroline and George had one daughter, named Charlotte, in 1796, but she died in 1817. George was considered a great wit, but was also a buffoon, and his death was hailed with relief. He died in 1830 and was laid to rest at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England. King William IV reigned from 1830 to 1837. Known as the Sailor King, for 10 years the young Prince William, brother of George IV, served in the Royal Navy. He was the third son of George III. Before his accession he lived with a Mrs. Jordan, an actress, by whom he had 10 children. When Princess Charlotte died, he had to marry in order to secure succession. He married Adelaide of Saxe-Coburg in 1818. He had 2 daughters, but they did not live. He hated pomp and wanted to dispense with the coronation. The people loved him because of his lack of pretension. During his reign England abolished slavery in the colonies in 1833. The Reform Act was passed in 1832. This extended the franchise to the middle classes on a basis of property qualifications. He died in 1837 and was buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire. Queen Victoria reigned from 1837 to 1901. Her reign was the longest by any monarch in British history, lasting 64 consecutive years. Victoria was the only child of Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg and Edward Duke of Kent, 4th son of George III. The throne Victoria inherited was weak and unpopular. Her Hanoverian uncles had been treated with irreverence. In 1840 she married her cousin Albert of Saxe-Coburg. Albert exerted tremendous influence over the Queen and until his death was virtual ruler of the country. He was a pillar of respectability and left 2 legacies to England, the Christmas tree and the Great Exhibition of 1851. With the money from the exhibition several institutions were developed: the Victoria and Albert Museum, the Science Museum, Imperial College and the Royal Albert Hall. The Queen withdrew from public life after the death of Albert in 1861 until her Golden Jubilee in 1887. Her reign saw the British Empire double in size, and in 1876 the Queen became Empress of India, the jewel in the crown. The British Empire and British world power had reached their highest point. She had 9 children, 40 grandchildren and 37 great-grandchildren, scattered all over Europe. She died in 1901. She was buried at the Royal Burial Grounds at Frogmore, Berkshire, England. King Edward VII reigned from 1901 to 1910. A much-loved king, the opposite of his father. He loved horse racing, gambling and women. This Edwardian age was one of elegance. Edward had all the social graces and many sporting interests, yachting and horse racing. His horse Minoru won the Derby in 1909. Edward married the beautiful Alexandra of Denmark in 1863 and they had 6 children. The eldest, Edward Duke of Clarence, died in 1892 just before he was to marry Princess Mary of Teck. When Edward died in 1910, it is said that Queen Alexandra brought his current mistress Mrs. Keppel to his bedside to take her farewell. His best-known mistress was Lily Langtry, the Jersey Lily. Edward VII died in 1910 and was buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England. King George V reigned from 1910 to 1936. George had not expected to be king, but when his elder brother died he became the heir apparent. He had joined the Navy as a cadet in 1877 and loved the sea. He was a bluff, hearty man with a quarter-deck manner. In 1893 he married Princess Mary of Teck, his dead brother's fiancée. His years on the throne were difficult, the First World War in 1914 to 1918 and the Troubles in Ireland, which led to the creation of the Irish Free State, were considerable problems. In 1932 he began the royal broadcasts on Christmas Day and in 1935 he celebrated his Silver Jubilee. His latter years were overshadowed by his concern about his son the Prince of Wales and his infatuation with Mrs. Simpson. George V died in 1936 and was buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire, England. King Edward VIII reigned briefly in June 1936 before he abdicated the throne. Edward was the most popular Prince of Wales England has ever had. Consequently, when he renounced the throne to marry Mrs. Wallis Simpson, the country found it almost impossible to believe. The people as a whole knew nothing about Mrs. Simpson until early in December 1936. Mrs. Simpson was an American, a divorcee and had 2 husbands still living. This was unacceptable to the church, as Edward had stated that he wanted her to be crowned with him at the coronation, which was to take place the following May. Edward abdicated in favor of his brother and took the title, Duke of Windsor. He went to live abroad. He died in 1972 and was laid to rest at Royal Burial Grounds at Frogmore in Berkshire, England. King George VI reigned from 1936 to 1952. George was a shy and nervous man with a very bad stutter, the exact opposite of his brother the Duke of Windsor, but he had inherited the steady virtues of his father George V. He was very popular and well loved by the English people. The prestige of the throne was low when he became king, but his wife Elizabeth and his mother Queen Mary were outstanding in their support of him. The Second World War started in 1939 and throughout the King and Queen set an example of courage and fortitude. They remained at Buckingham Palace for the duration of the war in spite of the bombing. The palace was bombed more than once. The 2 princesses, Elizabeth and Margaret, spent the war years at Windsor Castle. George was in close touch with the Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, throughout the war, and both had to be dissuaded from landing with the troops in Normandy on D-Day. The post-war years of his reign were ones of great social change and saw the start of the National Health Service. The whole country flocked to the Festival of Britain held in London in 1951, 100 years after the Great Exhibition during Victoria's reign. George died in 1952 and was buried at St. George's Chapel in Berkshire. Queen Elizabeth II reigned 1952, to present time. Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, or Lil Betty Close family, was born in London on the 21st of April 1926. Like her parents, Elizabeth was heavily involved in the war effort during the Second World War. Serving in the women's branch of the British Army known as the Auxiliary Territorial Service, training as a driver and mechanic, Elizabeth and her sister Margaret anonymously joined the crowded streets of London on VE Day to celebrate the end of the war. She married her cousin Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and they had 4 children, Charles, Anne, Andrew, and Edward. When her father George VI died, Elizabeth became Queen of 7 Commonwealth countries. Elizabeth's coronation in 1953 was the first to be televised, serving to increase popularity in the medium and doubling television license numbers in the UK. 2012 sees Elizabeth celebrate her 60th year as Queen, second only to Queen Victoria as longest-reigning British monarch. The huge popularity of the recent royal wedding between the Queen's grandson, Prince William, and the commoner Kate Middleton, now known as the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge, has shown the continuing importance of the British monarchy worldwide.
Well, there you have it. I should hope that, after viewing this video, that everyone knows their monarchy a bit better, and can memorize each and every king and queen frontwards, as well as backwards without a miscue. If not, then you are not paying attention. Just teasing. If this video becomes a Who triumph and I have many views, you shall see me with a. If not, then, well, I will think of something. Please feel free to comment or post. Virtual Mysterygirl00. Oh, and yes, lest I forget, haha, good day.